don't mind the term African American. I don't want to be called African American.
Why is that?
I'm not African.
I am not an African. I am a Black American.
African Americans are not from Africa.
Are Black Americans really Black Indians, Cherokees, Blackfoot, ancient Moors, or Africans? It's the question sparking arguments in barbershops, family gatherings, and blowing up online. Some say their ancestors were already here, long before Columbus set sail. So who is right?
Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Decades of DNA research and over 15,000 Black American family histories reveal something shocking. Evidence that doesn't just challenge old assumptions. It flips the script on Black American identity. Watch until the very end, because by the end of this Black History in Color episode, you'll know exactly where your people came from. Here, we believe the truth will set you free. But first, it will make you uncomfortable. If you want the real Black history schools never taught, subscribe, because this story is only the beginning. To understand this identity crisis, we need to understand why these beliefs exploded in the first place. And it starts with something every Black American family knows: the stories. Picture this. You grow up in the South, maybe Mississippi, or North Carolina. You've never been to Africa. Your great-grandmother talks about Indian blood in the family. She points to high cheekbones, straight hair, says we ain't like them other folks. For generations, many families were cut off from their African roots. When you're raised on land your family lived on for hundreds of years, it's easier to connect with that heritage than with a continent you've never seen. But here's where it gets really interesting. During slavery and after, record-keeping was deliberately messy, according to historian Tia Miles, author of Ties That Bind. In some colonies, Africans were literally labeled as Indians in the census to dodge taxes or laws. Then there's the real history textbooks often skip: intermarriage. In the Carolinas, Virginia, Oklahoma, Florida, Africans and natives lived side by side. Some escaped slaves joined native tribes, others intermarried, as documented by historian Kenneth Wiggins Porter in the Black Seminoles, History of a Freedom-Seeking People. Out of that came groups like the Black Seminoles, Africans and Native Americans fighting together, raising families together, becoming one people. So if you grew up in a community like that, your family's stories might lean heavily toward being Native, even if most of your bloodline was African. These weren't lies, they were survival strategies that became family truth. But in the last 20 years, DNA studies have tested tens of thousands of Black Americans, and what those tests revealed doesn't exactly match the "we were always here" narrative. The question is, what do they show? The DNA doesn't lie. Here's the part most people don't expect. Over the last 15 years, geneticists have studied the DNA of more than 50,000 African Americans. Not a handful of samples, a massive, undeniable data set. The results? They're remarkably consistent. 73% West African ancestry, 19% European ancestry, 8% Native American ancestry. Now, these numbers shift depending on region. Black folks in Louisiana or the Carolinas show higher Native percentages. New York or Chicago lean more heavily toward Africa and Europe. But here's the kicker. If the majority of Black Americans were truly Black Indians, the DNA would show 30, 40, 50% Native ancestry. Instead, it's usually under 10%. Dr. Carlos Bustamante, professor of biomedical data science at Stanford University and lead researcher on multiple African American genetic studies, conducted a landmark 2014 study that analyzed 5,269 African Americans across the United States. The African component wasn't just generically African, it pointed to specific regions and ethnic groups. According to geneticist Dr. Katarzyna Breik from 23andMe, whose research was published in the American Journal of Human Genetics, the genetic signatures point directly to the Yoruba people of Nigeria, the Mandinka of Senegal and Gambia, the Igbo of Nigeria, various Bantu-speaking groups of Central Africa. These correspond exactly with historical slave trading centers. It's not coincidence, it's evidence. Now some people push back and say, but what if those people in West Africa weren't even Africans? What if they were Melanesian people who got there first? Let's address that right now. According to Dr. David Reich, geneticist at Harvard and author of Who We Are and How We Got Here, DNA analysis shows clear genetic signatures tracing Native American ancestry back to Siberian populations who crossed the Bering Land Bridge 15,000 to 20,000 years ago. While there are some genetic markers suggesting limited Pacific contact, there's no evidence of large-scale Melanesian settlement. Dr. Jennifer Raff, author of Origin, A Genetic History of the Americas, explains that Melanesian populations carry distinct genetic markers that would be easily detectable in Native American DNA. There had been significant intermixing. These markers are largely absent from Native American populations, but that small percentage of Native ancestry in African American DNA, it's real. The stories our families told about Indian blood, some of them are absolutely true. More importantly, there's evidence that Africans might have been in the Americas long before anyone wants to admit. Evidence that could challenge everything we think we know about this debate. The ancient mystery. Were Africans here first? But before we explore pre-Columbian contact, let us tackle a question that always comes up. If Africans could sail to America thousands of years ago, why didn't they build great civilizations in Africa itself? This question reveals a fundamental gap in what we were taught about African history. According to archaeologist Dr. Roderick McIntosh, author of Ancient Middle Niger, Urbanism and the Self-Organizing Landscape, Africa was home to some of the world's most advanced civilizations. The Kingdom of Kush in Sudan built more pyramids than Egypt. The Great Zimbabwe Complex in southern Africa was a massive stone city that controlled gold trade routes. It's documented by historian Basil Davidson in The African Genius. The University of Timbuktu had over 700,000 manuscripts on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and law when European universities were just beginning. Dr. Christopher Ehret, professor of African history at UCLA and author of The Civilizations of Africa, points out that Africa gave the world iron metallurgy, complex agricultural systems, and sophisticated political structures. The question isn't why Africans didn't build civilizations, it's why we were not taught about the ones they built. Now, with that foundation, let's explore the pre-Columbian evidence. Let's start with West Africa in the early 1300s. Before Mansa Musa became the richest man who ever lived, his brother Abu Bakr II ruled Mali. According to historian Francois-Xavier Favel, author of The Golden Rhinoceros, Histories of the African Middle Ages, Abu Bakr gave up the throne because he was obsessed with one thing: exploring the Atlantic Ocean. As recorded by the 14th century Arab historian Al-Umari in his chronicles, Abu Bakr set sail with hundreds of ships, determined to see what lay beyond the Western Sea. Some records say he never came back, but others hint that he reached distant lands, and his sailors described finding a river with a powerful current, which sounds remarkably like the Amazon. But here's where another alternative theory enters the conversation. Some claim that Mansa Musa himself wasn't even African, that he descended from Native Americans who had colonized West Africa first, according to Dr. Michael McCormick, author of Origins of the European Economy, an expert on medieval trade networks. The Mali Empire's wealth came from controlling established African gold mines that had been operated by local populations for over 1,000 years before Mansa Musa's reign. These were not new discoveries by outside colonists. Dr. Christopher Ehret's linguistic research in a historical comparative reconstruction of Nilo-Saharan shows that Mande languages belonged to the Niger-Congo family that developed in West Africa over 5,000 years ago. If Native Americans had colonized West Africa, we would expect linguistic connections to Native American language families. These connections simply don't exist. The genetic evidence is decisive. Research by Dr. Sarah Tishkoff shows that West African populations carry ancient genetic lineages dating back 50,000 plus years. Dr. Spencer Wells, author of The Journey of Man, A Genetic Odyssey, explains that Native American colonization would have left clear genetic markers. These markers are essentially absent from historical West African populations. Back to the pre-Columbian evidence. Then there are the Olmec heads in Mexico. Massive stone sculptures with broad noses and full lips, carved over 1,000 years before Columbus. While mainstream archaeologists like Dr. Richard Deal, the author of the Olmecs, America's First Civilization, maintain they represent local features, the resemblance to African faces keeps the debate alive. Columbus himself wrote in his journal, as documented in the 4 Voyages of Columbus edited by Cecil Jane, that when he arrived in the Caribbean, locals told him about black-skinned people who had come trading from the south and east, bringing weapons made of gold-tipped metal. Dr. Ivan van Sertima, author of They Came Before Columbus, compiled extensive evidence suggesting pre-Columbian contact between Africa and the Americas. So when people say we were already here, part of that may come from an ancient truth that history is mostly ignored. But here's the problem, and this is where we need to separate fact from fiction. The evidence for pre-Columbian African contact is intriguing but limited. What's not limited is the massive, documented evidence for the transatlantic slave trade. But first, let's address another theory that's gained traction, that the people shipped from Africa weren't actually Africans, but Hebrew populations deported to West Africa from Spain and Portugal after the Inquisition. According to historian Dr. Toby Green, author of The Rise of the Transatlantic Slave Trade in Western Africa, Portuguese slave traders were operating in West Africa decades before the Spanish Inquisition even began. The Benin bronzes, created by the Edo people of Nigeria, depict Portuguese Portuguese soldiers and traders from the 1480s showing established contact with indigenous African kingdoms, not displaced Hebrew populations. The genetic evidence destroys this theory. According to research published by Dr. Sarah Tishkoff's team in Science magazine, Jewish populations carry distinct genetic markers that would be easily detectable in African American DNA. If there had been large-scale Hebrew settlement in West Africa, these markers are largely absent from African American genetic profiles. Dr. Linda Haywood, co-author of Central African's Atlantic Creoles and the Foundation of the Americas, points out that slave ship records consistently describe cultural practices, languages, and religious beliefs that correspond directly to West and Central African traditions, not Iberian Hebrew customs. Now, let's address the no-ship manifest's claim. The Transatlantic Slave Trade Database, compiled by Dr. David Eltis of Emory University and his team, has documented over 36,000 slave voyages with surviving records. These aren't just names on a list. We're talking about detailed manifests, insurance documents, customs records, and captain's logs. According to historian Marcus Rediker, author of The Slave Ship, A Human History. The British National Archives alone hold over 15,000 documents related to slave ship voyages. Portuguese, Spanish, French, and Dutch archives contain tens of thousands more. The mathematics are horrific, but clear. As documented by historians David Eltis and David Richardson in Atlas of the Transatlantic Slave Trade, over 350 years, approximately 12.5 million Africans were shipped to the Americas. Let's tackle the Cherokee claims specifically. Cherokee genealogist Dr. Twyla Barnes, whose research has been published in the Cherokee Phoenix and various genealogical journals, has spent decades researching African American claims to Cherokee ancestry. Her conclusion? The vast majority of African Americans claiming Cherokee ancestry cannot trace their lineage through official Cherokee rolls or historical Cherokee communities. As documented by historian Faye Yarborough in Race and the Cherokee Nation, Sovereignty in the 19th century, the Cherokee Nation itself practiced slavery, owning thousands of enslaved Africans by the 1860s. Cherokee census records clearly distinguish between Cherokee citizens and their enslaved people of African descent. But the most compelling evidence comes from genetics. According to research published in Nature Genetics by Dr. Christopher Gainu and his team, if African Americans were primarily Native American, their DNA would show those signatures. Instead, the genetic markers point overwhelmingly to West and Central Africa, exactly where the slave trade concentrated. This doesn't mean family stories about Native ancestry are all false. That 8% average Native DNA is real. It represents real relationships, real families, real love stories between African Americans and Native Americans. But it's a branch of the family tree, not the whole tree. Before we dive into the real African heritage, there's one more alternative narrative we need to address. The theory that Black people were the original global civilization, including claims about Tartarians and that we were worldwide before slavery. This theory suggests that Black people originally inhabited every continent and built the world's greatest civilizations, from the pyramids to European castles, before being systematically erased from history. The Tartarian Empire claims. The Tartarian theory claims that a great Black civilization called Tartary once dominated much of Europe and Asia, building magnificent architecture before being destroyed and covered up by modern governments. According to historian Dr. James Forsyth, author of A History of the Peoples of Siberia, and Dr. David Morgan and the Mongols, Tartary was indeed a historical region, but it referred to various Turkic and Mongolic peoples of Central Asia, not a unified Black empire. The name comes from Tatar, referring to specific ethnic groups, not skin color. Dr. Francine Hirsch, author of Empire of Nations, Ethnographic Knowledge, and the Making of the Soviet Union, explains that 18th and 19th century European maps labeled vast areas of Asia as Tartary, simply because they were unexplored territories inhabited by various nomadic peoples. This wasn't evidence of a hidden Black civilization. It was cartographic shorthand for unknown lands. The architectural evidence cited by Tartarian theorists faces a crucial problem, according to Dr. Spiro Kostov, author of A History of Architecture, Settings and Rituals. The buildings attributed to Tartarians have well-documented construction histories with surviving records, architectural plans, and known builders. The Hermitage in St. Petersburg, for example, has detailed construction records showing Italian and French architects built it for Russian emperors in the 1700s. The genetic evidence contradicts worldwide Black settlement, according to research by Dr. Spencer Wells in The Journey of Man and Dr. Luigi Luca Cavalli Sforza in the history and geography of human genes, ancient DNA from archaeological sites across Europe, Asia, and the Americas shows clear population continuities that don't support massive black civilizations being replaced. Dr. David Reich's research in who we are and how we got here demonstrates that European populations show genetic continuity going back thousands of years, with clear markers tracing back to hunter-gatherer and early farming populations. If Europe had been dominated by African populations, the genetic signature would be unmistakable. Archaeological evidence also contradicts these claims. Dr. Colin Renfrew, author of Prehistory, The Making of the Human Mind, points out that we have continuous archaeological records showing cultural development in Europe, Asia, and the Americas that correspond to local populations. It's not evidence of erased black civilizations. Many of these theories point to Moorish Spain as evidence of black European civilization. Let's clarify this history. According to historian Dr. David Nicole, author of The Moors, The Islamic West, 7th–5th centuries AD, and Dr. Richard Fletcher, in Moorish Spain, the Moors were indeed Muslim conquerors who ruled much of Spain, from 711 to 1492 CE, but the population was ethnically diverse, including Arab, Berber, and yes, some sub-Saharan African elements. Dr. Olivia Remy Constable, author of Medieval Iberia, explains that while some Moorish leaders and scholars were of African descent, the majority of the population remained indigenous, Iberian, with Arab and Berber rulers forming the elite. The genetic evidence from modern Spanish populations, as published by Dr. Mark Jobling's team in the European Journal of Human Genetics, shows that while there was some African genetic input during the Moorish period, it represents a small percentage of overall Spanish ancestry. This suggests cultural and political dominance by a minority elite, not population replacement by Africans. Even if we accepted that Moors were predominantly black, this doesn't explain African American ancestry, since African Americans' genetic markers point to West and Central Africa, not North Africa. Another related claim suggests that all indigenous peoples worldwide, from Native Americans to Australian Aboriginals to Pacific Islanders, are actually original Asiatics, making Africa irrelevant to Black American identity. This theory crumbles under genetic analysis. According to research published in Nature by Dr. S.K. Willerslev's team, Native American populations show clear genetic signatures, tracing back to Siberian populations who crossed the Bering Land Bridge. Dr. Anasapfo Malaspinas's research on Australian Aboriginal genetics shows they descend from the first human migration out of Africa 50,000 plus years ago, but developed as a distinct population for tens of thousands of years. It's documented by Dr. Jonathan Fredlander in The Human Genetic History of Oceania, show complex patterns of migration and settlement that don't support a unified original Asiatic identity. Why these theories persist? These global black civilization theories serve an understandable psychological purpose. It's explained by Dr. John Henrik Clark in African World Revolution and Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop in Pre-Colonial Black Africa. When you've been told your ancestors contributed nothing to world civilization, it's natural to swing toward claiming they contributed everything. The impulse is completely understandable. For centuries, African achievements were erased, minimized, or attributed to others. The Kingdom of Mali, Great Zimbabwe, the Nubian pharaohs, the universities of Timbuktu, all ignored in traditional Western education. But the solution to historical erasure isn't to claim every ancient civilization was black. The solution is to reclaim the actual African civilizations that were ignored, the real African heritage. So what does the evidence actually reveal about African American heritage? The answer is a story more remarkable and inspiring than any myth. African Americans descend from dozens of distinct African ethnic groups, each with their own languages, cultures, kingdoms, and traditions. These were not primitive societies, they were sophisticated civilizations. According to historian Michael Gomez, author of Exchanging Our Country Marks, enslaved Africans brought rice cultivation techniques that fed the Carolina colonies. Architectural knowledge still visible in American buildings, and musical traditions that became jazz, blues, gospel, is documented by art historian Suzanne Preston Blyer in Royal Arts of Africa. The Yoruba kingdoms created some of humanity's most sophisticated bronze and ironwork. The kingdom of Benin's bronze plaques were so advanced that British soldiers in 1897 refused to believe Africans had created them. According to historian Judith Carney, author of Black Rice, The African Origins of Rice Cultivation in the Americas, the genetic evidence reveals the survival of African heritage despite centuries of oppression. Research published in the American Journal of Human Genetics by Dr. Sarah Tishkoff's team shows that certain genetic markers associated with resistance to malaria helped African Americans survive in American environments where malaria was prevalent. Even their genes tell a story of survival and adaptation. This is heritage to be proud of. not rejected. Your ancestors weren't just victims, they were survivors, innovators, culture creators who maintained their humanity despite unimaginable cruelty. Reconciling truth and family stories. So where does this leave the millions of Black Americans who grew up believing they were Cherokee, Blackfoot, or descendants of ancient Moors? Understanding scientific truth doesn't require abandoning family stories. Those stories served a purpose. As explained by sociologist Dr. Tukufu Zuberi in Thicker Than Blood, How Racial Statistics Lie. In a country that demonized African identity, claiming native heritage was sometimes safer, sometimes more dignifying, sometimes just more psychologically bearable. Your great-grandmother, who talked about Indian blood, she might have been protecting family secrets, or passing down real memories of a native ancestor, or holding on to dignity in any way she could. None of that makes her a liar. We can honor family stories while embracing scientific evidence. The 8% Native American ancestry and African American DNA is real, represents real families, real love, real connections that survived slavery and Jim Crow. It's part of the story, just not the whole story. The 73% African ancestry represents something even more powerful. Survival of the strongest kind. Your ancestors survived the Middle Passage. They survived slavery, survived Jim Crow. They created culture, raised families, built communities, and passed their strength down to you. That's not a story of victimhood. That's a story of triumph. The truth may be complicated, but it's always worth pursuing. What do you think about this evidence? How does it change your understanding of African American ancestry? Let me know in the comments. And if this deep dive into history, genetics, and family stories opened your eyes, hit that subscribe button. Because the truth about who we are is always more fascinating than the myths we tell ourselves.